Hello everybody and welcome to the show. This is the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. Today we are answering a question that I got recently that actually I have answered before on the podcast, but this was way back in episode 73, and maybe many of you haven't heard that one. I know not everyone goes back and listens to the very old ones. If you are a bit newer to this podcast, then you might not know the podcast has kind of changed a little bit over the years. At the beginning, I was focusing a lot more on language learning tips. I was answering questions about how to learn English and kind of that kind of stuff, and then it's changed a little bit now. It's got a little bit more open and we explore different topics, more kind of a larger variety than we used to. But the episode from 73 was how to learn 2 languages at the same time. And I thought this would be such a good one to revisit because, first of all, I have had several years more experience learning multiple languages myself. So I think my advice may have updated a little bit. I may have some new advice. And yeah, maybe many of you haven't heard the first episode. And I think it's really nice. I love to make episodes based on your questions because if you have a question, that means that other people probably have the same question. And making an episode can help them. And it also means if I get an email with a question, rather than writing a long list of advice, I can just send people this episode. So if you're listening to this because I sent you an email, then welcome to you. But yeah, I don't want to just say exactly what I said the first time. I do remember a little bit of what I said those few years ago when I covered this before, but I didn't re-listen to the episode because I didn't want to be affected by what I said before. I didn't just want to copy. So all of these ideas are from my current brain from now. And of course, many of them may be similar to what I said before. There may be some overlap, but I really hope there will be something new here as well. But anyway, I want to break up this part or this episode into, I would say, 2 or 3 areas. First of all, just some things to consider, just a short area to talk about. And then I want to talk in more detail about some general tips on doing this, on learning 2 languages at the same time. I also want to talk a little bit about my own experience because that's where I can give you the most advice, I suppose. I think it's one thing to listen to what sounds like good advice, but it's another thing to use your own experience to help guide other people. So hopefully maybe you can learn from my own experience too. And yeah, I also want to go through some examples of daily routines of a few different ways of what you could do to learn 2 languages at the same time. So there should be a lot to pick up from this one, a lot to learn, and I hope you'll find it useful. And maybe, even if you're not learning 2 languages, I think there might be some takeaways. A takeaway is like a lesson that you can learn. So say if you're trying to learn English, but also trying to study something else, or you're trying to focus on your family or your job, you're juggling, you're balancing 2 different things or more, I think this could be interesting and relevant to you as well. So hopefully for everyone, there is something here. But yes, as I said, let's go into some things to consider. This is just some ideas I had on learning 2 languages and whether it's the right choice for you. I think I said this last time, and this was essentially the idea that every additional thing that we do, every task that we take on in life is a sacrifice in some way. We all have 24 hours in the day, and we can't do everything. So every additional thing that we do will, in some ways, negatively affect our lives. Obviously, we hope that the positives will outweigh the negatives, but it's not possible to take on a new thing and not lose something else. What I mean by that is if you're learning English, like 100%, that's your full attention when it comes to languages, that's great. If you want to learn a second language, that's going to likely take away from your English learning time. So really what that means is it's not possible to learn two languages at the same level or speed or intensity as you would with one language. Maybe you could still increase or you can improve at the same level, at the same amount, but you will have to put more time into it. That's what I find personally with my two languages. I have to put a lot more time into them. So this may be obvious for some of you or for many of you, but I think it's important to consider, right? When you start learning a new language, you have to accept that your other language may suffer slightly. I'm not saying it will get worse, but the improvements will probably slow down. So that's really important to understand. The more things we do, the less, the less attention we can give it. It's something I'm thinking about with my work all the time too. I want to focus on just one or two things because if I try to focus on 100 different things, YouTube, podcast, Instagram, all this social media stuff, it will all be quite bad and low quality. So it's good to focus on just what is important and nothing else. Of course, it's also really nice if you can be clear on your motivations for learning. This is the same as learning one language, of course, but with two, as I said, it's harder, it takes more time, and it's not going to be quite as easy. So you need to be really, really clear on why you're learning. If you just think it might be interesting, it might be fun, you could learn a language, but I think most people will need a little bit more motivation. They'll need a reason to keep going. A big one for me is travel. When I have a trip coming up in the future, it really motivates me to learn and improve even faster. So that could be one simple idea that you could do as well. But yeah, think about your motivation. That's important. Another kind of general thing I want to share is, in my opinion, learning two languages at the same time from scratch, that means from zero, is very, very hard. And you will likely get very frustrated. In fact, unless you have a really good reason to, I would generally recommend not doing that. I think it's very confusing to learn two languages at the same time when they're both the same level, because you mix up things a lot more. They take up kind of the same space in your mind, I have found, and it's just very difficult to do that. So if you're really motivated, maybe it can work, but it's likely that you will face many frustrations along the way. So be very careful with that one. I will talk about this more a bit later, but I would recommend generally starting with one and then adding another one once you get fairly good at the first one. The final thing that I want to share to consider before we get into the main part is, when it comes to learning two languages that are very similar, you might find it quite confusing. For example, English and Spanish, or Japanese and Chinese, languages that share kind of that close history together, and they have similar words and sounds and grammar. You might get confused between them. That's what I felt anyway in my experience. But I do think that eventually you will learn to separate them in your mind. And this has also been shown with young children and babies who are raised bilingually with two languages or more. They do tend to mix languages a lot at the beginning. They might say "I want" in English, and they might say an apple in French, another language. And that's quite natural because they haven't separated the languages yet. And I think the same happens for adults sometimes. But yeah, in my experience, this gets better with time. The more time you spend studying, the more deeply you understand each language, the less you will confuse the words and the grammar and all the other stuff. So if you are feeling frustrated with that, I would just say keep waiting, keep studying, and it will get better with time. That would be my advice on that area. But okay, so I have some more tips now. I have a list here that I've prepared, just some general ideas. I've got 5 general tips to start with. So this first one is what I mentioned just now. Actually, I'm coming back to it right away. And this is it's generally a good idea to get one language to a conversational level before beginning another. This is advice I've seen everywhere online, and I've also found it true for myself. The general advice is you get one to kind of like a B1 or B2 level. Maybe B1 is fine, where you can have a conversation with someone with some difficulty, but a somewhat clear conversation. And once you're there, in my mind, it's kind of like you're climbing a mountain, and if you stop climbing anytime, you will slide down the mountain. So you have to get to this checkpoint, right? This is how I see it in my mind. And then halfway up the mountain, when you get to this kind of intermediate level, there's like a step where you can stand on the step, you can rest, you can even camp or sleep the night, and you can keep improving beyond that level to the advanced levels. But even if you fall back down, you will always land back on that step. And what I mean by this metaphor is, even if you stop studying for like 1 year, you will always kind of have a basic understanding of the language. Maybe it's not quite that simple. The longer you don't do something, the more you forget, right? But I do feel like there is a difference. Like if you study for 6 months and you stop for 2 years, you might forget almost everything, just like my Cantonese knowledge. But I feel like once you get to that intermediate level, it takes a lot longer to forget. You can stop studying for a few years. You'll forget quite a lot, but you can always come back to some kind of checkpoint. You don't have to start from the beginning again. And yeah, I kind of forgot why I was explaining this analogy. But anyway, I think it's an interesting one. But yeah, I think the main idea was try to get one to that step before you pick up another one. That's generally some good advice. Another thing that you can do to help you is to try to make the languages very separate. The brain is very good at making associations between things. It's actually a very powerful thing that the brain can do. I can't think of a specific example, but I wonder maybe if you always get hungry at 4 o'clock. Let's say it happens every day. You get hungry at 4 o'clock, and when you were in school, 4 o'clock was your history lesson. Right? That's every day 4 o'clock history class. So now, many years later, as an adult, every time you think about history, you feel hungry. That's a random example that is not a real story from me, but something like that could be true, right? It's kind of believable because the brain is really good at making associations and even making you feel hungry or tired or something based on what you feel or see in your environment. And it really works the same way in languages. I have felt this so strongly. So when it comes to learning 2 languages, I think it's really nice to make them as separate as you can. So this might be, for example, learning them at different times of the day. Say English in the morning and Arabic in the evening. So you've got a different feeling when you study each one. Different places. I think we can all study in a different place. You might study Japanese at your desk where you work, and you might go to study English in the garden, outside. I don't know, just have a different environment so your brain gets into that English learning mode or the other language learning mode. That can be quite powerful. I found it even useful when you sit in a different, for example, a different side of the table. I used to study my languages in my old house on one side of the table, and I did this kind of work, podcasting, on the other side of the table. So on one side, I was in like a work teaching mode, and on the other side, I was in a study mode. And it seems like it doesn't make any difference because the space is so small, but just having that different background, the different view, the different sunlight in your eyes, I do think it makes a difference. I've even heard of people doing things like wearing different clothing, like different colors, or even just the way that you kind of think can be quite different. You have like a different personality in your head. So yeah, I think these different associations can help separate the languages and not confuse them so much as well. So yeah, see what you can do with that. See what you can come up with. I think that can be good. One example of where this didn't work so well for me because I didn't follow this advice was I first went to a Japanese speaking club here. We met up in this cafe in Bangkok to practice our Japanese speaking, and it was quite fun, it was enjoyable. And then I was making my own Chinese speaking club a few weeks later, and I decided to go back to the same cafe because it's big, it was quite a good spot for studying and chatting with a large number of people. But when I did, I found I was getting really, really confused between Chinese and Japanese. My brain couldn't focus on using Chinese alone. And I think I realized afterwards it was because my brain associated that environment with speaking Japanese. So adding in another language was very difficult. Maybe when you're more advanced, it's fine. It's maybe a good thing to mix up environments, but at the lower levels, consider separating those study places. So that was a funny example from my experience. Another thing I think is really important in my experience is, even more so than just one language, get really clear and specific on your plans and your expectations. For example, when will you study? You really want to make sure you have enough time for both languages. So make sure you know what time of the day you'll study, how long roughly that you want to spend studying, and allot that time. Allot means to give that time for your language learning. And I think that's really important because time management is harder when you're juggling two languages, right? And yeah, as with any learning, start small, right? So start small, don't make it really big. At the moment, I am studying like maybe 2 or 3 hours every day. I definitely didn't start out doing it this way. There was a time when I did 10 minutes a day. Now I'm doing 2 or 3 hours a day. It works well with my current routine and I enjoy it. I don't feel like I'm forcing myself to do it. In fact, I really look forward to doing it every day. So that's what I do. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend starting with 3 hours a day. So start small and build up gradually over time. By the way, if you do want some more advice on building a routine, whether it's for one language or two, I do have a routine course over on the Level Up English website. So if you want to become a member over there, I've got a course with video lessons from me that walk you through step by step how to make a language learning routine that you can personalize, you can make for yourself. I'm quite proud of that course. So if you feel like that's something missing from your current routine habits, then let me know, or you can just go to the website and search for that study routine course. Become a member and it will become open for you. But yeah, the final general tip I want to give is another really helpful one. And this is that many people will focus, or let's say 80% on one language and about 20% on the other. This goes back to something I spoke about a few months ago called the 80-20 rule. It's a common pattern that we see around the world. And many people will say this works best. It's very hard to just do 50-50 on both languages. It's probably a good idea to find or to choose one language as your kind of priority language. This might be the language that you are less good at, right? So focus on your weakest language. That could be one solution. Or what I tend to do is I prioritize whichever one I need more at the moment. So before my trip to Japan this year, I was doing 80% Japanese, 20% Chinese. But now my next trip will be China. I'm going to China in a few months. So I think from now on, I'm going to switch that around and do 80% Chinese and 20% Japanese. And that 20% is just enough to keep going, but you won't see quick improvements. But yeah, you can try 50-50. Let me know how it goes for you, but I think you'll find it might be too hard to manage. And I do wonder as well, maybe naturally you might switch into that 80-20 mode. It's kind of difficult to be interested in or passionate about two things at the same level at the same time. I think naturally we kind of gravitate, we move towards one thing. I found that true with myself. So something to consider. You may not be able to study both of them with the same level of intensity. But okay, I want to go through now some daily routine examples. I have 3 ideas to share, some that I've tried before. And as with the other things I'm mentioning today, if there's another idea that I haven't mentioned that you have tried or you think about, let me know in the comments and I can update this episode or update my opinion with your ideas too. I'd love to hear what you think. But anyway, I'm going to share first of all my current routine, which is alternating. In other words, alternating day by day. So I haven't written this down because I trusted that I would remember, because it's something I do every day. So I'll try to go through my routine in my head now. Every morning I have the same routine, which is flashcards. That's a little bit of a simplification. There's a little bit more to it. But basically I use Anki, software Anki, for flashcards. And in the morning, it depends how many flashcards I have. It changes every day. But generally, I spend about 40 minutes on Japanese. I have a few different flashcard decks for Japanese. So quite a long time on that. And maybe 20 minutes on Chinese. The reason Japanese is longer is because I'm studying a lot of vocabulary for an exam I'm taking later in the year. But yeah, so there's basically about 1 hour every day using flashcards for Japanese and Chinese. So that's every day I do both languages in the morning. And that's become really, really useful for me. I also do maybe 5 minutes of Thai as well, or maybe 1 minute of Thai. Very, very short in the Thai language. So that's useful. That's every morning. Then I stop for the day. I might listen to some podcasts in each language in the day, but it depends what I'm in the mood for. I don't put pressure on myself to do that. But then a big part of my routine this year is the afternoon part, which I didn't have last year. And this is where I tend to go to a cafe or something that isn't too expensive, hopefully. I might bring my laptop, I bring a book maybe, and I do some studying there. But I alternate each day. So for example, today might be Monday. Monday will be my Japanese day, where I go to the cafe, I read my Japanese book, I write some sentences using some new words or some new grammar to practice. I like to use Apple Notes because it syncs between my phone and my laptop very easily. So I like to do some writing and reading basically in the cafe. And this is a daily routine. But then Tuesday, the next day, would be my Chinese day. So I would do the same thing, but take a Chinese book and do some reading in Chinese, some writing in Chinese, and then I occasionally do some transcription practice as well, where I listen and I write down what I hear. It kind of is what I'm in the mood for. I don't always do the same thing, but I always do something, and that's become a big part of my routine. But yeah, the key here is alternating. So Japanese one day, Chinese the next day. So even though the morning I have both, in the afternoon I only focus on one. So that works for me really well. I'm really enjoying that simplicity. It's going a lot better. Because before this year, I used to do a little bit of both every day. And I found this much harder to maintain. So this is the second option. For some of you, this may work best. But for me, I just found it really difficult to get really deep into one language. Because when you're focusing, you're switching your attention between one and then the other, it's very difficult to be so deep on one of them. So I feel like most people would find it easier to do one and then the other. But I do find my flashcards in the morning with both languages helps keep it fresh in my head. Because that means I have a little bit of practice every day, but I'm not going in too deeply. And the third method, which I've heard a lot about online, is kind of just focusing on one. I know that might seem strange with the title of today's episode, but many people find it just too hard to actively study 2 languages at once. So what many people do is they will study one language, their priority language, and the second language, kind of keeping it fresh, but they're not really actively studying it. So that might be occasionally listening to a podcast or reading a book in that language when they feel like they're in the mood. It might be something like flashcards, a little bit, 5 minutes every day. So it's something like you're doing enough studying to keep it in your mind so you don't forget, but you're not studying enough to see improvements in that language. And that's how my Japanese was for about 2 years. And honestly, I didn't really like it. I think with the way my brain works, I don't like the feeling of stagnating. Stagnating is basically when you stop improving, you're going up and then it just goes flat. I don't like that feeling. So for me, I quite like my alternation method. But many people will say this one works well as well. Just have one that you focus on and the other one is kind of in the background. I suppose it also depends on how much time you have. If you really want to improve your English, but you don't want to forget your Spanish, for example, then maybe just focus on English this year, and then Spanish can be a focus for the future, right? But yeah, a few ideas there, but again, let me know if you have another idea. Okay, I want to share my last part now. I want to share my experience. I know I've kind of already been sharing my experience, but now I've just got a list of some ideas that I've had from the last couple years on my own views when it comes to learning 2 languages. If you are new to the podcast, I'm learning Chinese and Japanese. That's my main 2. Thai language, I'm learning a little bit, but I'm kind of using it more than learning it. I try to, order my coffee in Thai, that kind of stuff, but I'm not really like studying Thai. I'm just like learning it when I'm out in the world. So for me, that feels like a different thing. I would love to learn Thai more, with more depth, but again, 3 languages. I mean, if 2 languages is hard, imagine 3. That's a whole different thing. That's very, very intense to do that. So, if you are learning 3, give me your advice. I'd love to know. So one thing I want to share from my own experience is how useful it has been to record my language learning progress, or at least the time that I'm spending on each language. If you saw I think it was my yearly review video at the end of 2024. It was, about New Year 2025, around that time, where I shared, on YouTube, I shared on my screen my language study graphs and how many hours I spent on both Chinese and Japanese. And it was quite interesting. I found it really interesting to look back over the year and see how my time went up and down in the year and, which language I gave the most time. And it doesn't have to be quite as nerdy and detailed as I do it, but just having some way to record how much time you're spending on each language, I find it's really useful because you may not be learning as much as you think you are. This is very common where our brain tricks us into thinking we're doing something much more when really that's not the case. So I found, for example, that I was by chance spending much more time on Japanese than I planned to do. I probably wouldn't have realized this if I didn't record it, but it's really interesting. Maybe I'll put it on screen here and you can actually see the amount of time I spent on Japanese recently overtook my Chinese, which maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but I found that quite interesting. And I think the point at which it overtook was when I went to Japan, and that's when my Japanese really went quite high. But honestly, I think I should give Chinese a little bit more focus at the moment. So looking at my graphs and my data, it allows me to notice and go, oh, Chinese is a lot lower than Japanese. Maybe I should put more focus on Chinese, and I can shift my plan and shift my attention slightly in the other direction. So recording your study time might help you plan what you do better and more efficiently as well. So that's what I found useful, but I am the kind of person who likes to plan and keep data. So it might depend on your brain and your way of thinking as well. And just so no one thinks I am an insane language learner, I will share one thing that I've really struggled with, which might make you feel better as well. I found it really, really difficult to study really intensely on one language, or especially two languages, while also doing other things in life. You might have family, things to deal with, and of course, work takes up so much time, hobbies, eating healthily, working out, exercising, all this kind of stuff in life that gets in the way. And at the end of the day, we have to decide on our priorities, what's important to us. And I think we have to accept, and it's really important, I think, to just sit down and decide where you want to prioritize. We can't have everything we want. I would love to have daily lessons in Japanese and Chinese, but actually I would hate it. I would love the outcome, but I would hate the process. In the last year or so, I've been having Chinese lessons online, conversation classes, 2 or 3 times a week, maybe even just once a week, depends on how busy I am. And I would love to do more Japanese speaking as well. But when I think about it, it's just so stressful. The thought of doing all this work and then Japanese classes, Chinese classes, meeting friends, exercising, all that kind of stuff, even without doing it, it makes me feel stressed already. Right now, I can feel myself getting stressed. So I kind of had to accept that I don't have the time or the priority right now to focus a lot on Japanese speaking. I still want to improve, but I have to accept that I'm not going to improve as quickly as I could. So that's important to consider and keep in mind that it's very hard to do everything in life. So think about what you want to prioritize. Another thing that I maybe mentioned at the beginning is try to embrace means accept your different personalities. I'm not saying that you have many well, I guess I kind of am actually. So when you're learning a language, you might be familiar with this. It's quite common, it's quite normal to have a different personality or different feeling when speaking another language. And this might just be random, or maybe it relates to the culture. For example, I can't speak Russian, but as far as I understand, Russian and Japanese are quite opposite in terms of directness. Russian can be very direct when you ask for something. I don't think you really need to say please, you just say give me this. And that's fine, that's normal. And in Japanese, even if you ask, it might be quite rude. You might have to be really indirect and not actually ask directly for what you want. I'm not going to give an example because I might get it wrong, but I think English is a bit like that, especially British English. You might not say, hey, can you close the window? You might say, oh, I'm getting a bit cold. I'm getting cold. And that phrase kind of means indirectly, close the window, right? So that's very opposite there. So for me, when I speak Japanese compared to Chinese, for example, I feel much more indirect, much more maybe submissive, if that's the right word, in Japanese, where I'm much more like, bowing my head a lot more, and I'm not so loud. I try to be quieter. And actually, I think that's wrong. I don't try to be quieter. It's natural. I think with my knowledge of the culture and how the language works, I'm a little bit different in Japanese. And I think that's just quite normal. And then Chinese might be a bit more direct, a bit like Russian in some ways. So yeah, Chinese I might be more direct and might even louder when I speak. I don't know. I'm only kind of guessing. But anyway, the point is, try to embrace those differences. And this will also help you separate both languages. If you kind of get into that way of thinking, like, okay, this is my English brain. This is the English way of thinking. Think about English culture and English accent. And that might help you get into that frame of mind. And then when you go to your other language, you try to get into a different personality. Try to embrace it. Really think about how you might be different in each language and go deeper and exaggerate those differences. It can be quite fun, but I think it also just helps separate them in your mind. That is certainly what I have felt in my studies, and hopefully you can relate to what I'm saying as well. Right, this next point is a huge one, and this is something, again, that I think many of you might feel better once you hear, and this is that it's very, very normal to feel that success in one language causes the other one to suffer. This I find incredibly frustrating. It's one of the hardest parts of my learning journey because it's quite demotivating in many ways. It's kind of like having a bucket filled with water, but there's like a few holes in the bucket, right? You can plug one hole to stop the water coming out, but then the water comes out the other hole, and you plug that one and it comes out the other hole. And it's really hard to keep the water in the bucket all the time. In other words, it's really hard to keep the knowledge in your brain while doing more than one thing at the same time. So I found this, sometimes I feel really, really good about my Japanese. Like right now, after my trip, I'm feeling quite confident. I feel like, yes, my Japanese is really good. But then I feel my Chinese has got so much worse. And 2 months ago, I felt the opposite. I was really happy about my Chinese, but I felt my Japanese was terrible. And I think these are related, when we focus more on one, because languages take up one space in our brain, perhaps. The other one might feel like it's getting worse. This is quite normal. I think it's quite natural. It's certainly normal for me, so don't worry if you feel the same way. I think I just have to trust that they both go up over time. With a long enough time of studying, they will eventually both improve. It may be true that once let's say your French gets better, your English might feel like it suffers as a result. But I don't think your English will necessarily get worse. It's just you haven't practiced as much. So you're not used to using it, but I don't think it's worse. The knowledge is still in your brain. You just need to kind of use that muscle again to unlock that knowledge. That's probably what I would say is really happening. You're not actually getting worse, so don't feel too bad. But yeah, I do think with enough time, you will improve both of them. It's just kind of like, you have to get this one higher, then run over here, get this one higher, and they're always going down, but you have to keep pushing them up. It's kind of like pushing two big rocks up a hill. You can only push one up at once. So you push one rock, you run to the other one, you push it up the mountain, and the other one, and you have to keep going back and forth. It's much, much harder than just pushing one rock, right? But eventually you can push two, but it just has a lot of running back and forth. Does that make sense? Again, maybe with the help of some AI, I will put an image on the YouTube version here so you can see what my brain is imagining right now. But yeah, okay. I'm getting almost stressed thinking about all these different problems that might come up. But I'm almost done here. So another one is, again, I've mentioned this before, actually. I'm repeating myself a lot today, but I think it's worth repeating. In my method at the moment, I try to be quite casual. I don't worry too much about which language has my focus. And I think it's quite natural for your focus to shift. So as I said, for me, it shifts between what is more important at this current time. Usually that's which country I'm visiting next. It might be for you what exam you have coming up next, or what motivation for you is currently stronger. If you have a French wife, for example, you might need to focus on your French a bit more than English. Or if you're working in England, maybe English would be more important, right? So it depends what's going on in your life, basically. For me, as I said, Chinese is going to be my focus from now on. I really want to put more time into Chinese, so I will feel confident and prepared for my trip in China this year. Assuming they accept my visa. Please accept me. But yes, that's quite normal. Motivation, as I said before, that's a big thing. You need to have some clear motivation to keep you going. I find having something planned really helps. Like it could be a trip to the country. For me, this year, as I said, I have an exam. Probably I haven't booked it, but I think I'll do it in December this year. And I planned it in January. So as soon as I planned to take this exam, I've had so much motivation for Japanese. I've been studying like 1 hour more every day, really, really intense study. And it's been so enjoyable. My improvements have really skyrocketed with vocabulary and grammar. And partly it's because of this exam. No, I'm not putting all of my hope in passing, but I just think having something on the horizon that you're working towards is much more motivating than just studying with no goal, with no end. You're just kind of doing it every day, but you don't really know why. So for me, that's been really helpful having that exam, because honestly, I don't have like a personal connection to Japan. I don't have any family in Japan or anything like that. So for me, that might be more important, but depends on your own situations with English and your other language. The final thing is an area where I could improve. I was trying to think about some areas in which I could do better on focusing with two languages. And I think the main one that I came up with is less study time and more, we could say, life integration. So this is the difference between formal sit-down studying and just using the language. A little bit like how I use my Thai language. I'm not really studying, but I'm just using it in the real world. So it doesn't feel like learning in a sense. I'm just practicing. And yeah, I think if I could make the effort to meet more friends and that kind of stuff while using each language, that would be much better, much more efficient, more fun. And yeah, I think that would be a great way to learn more. I've said it already, more efficiently, more fun, right? I think those are the key things. And yeah, I'm not sure if I will do that. I will try my best to do more Chinese speaking over the next few months, but again, it's the effort it takes and the time it takes. You have to really balance and prioritize, but I think that's the main area where I could improve at the moment. But this has been a somewhat long episode, but I hope you have found it useful. The last thing I want to say is just give me your advice. I am just one person learning two languages with one brain. So I'd love to hear what you think, and I'd love to see how your brain works. We're all different, so maybe you disagree with some of my points. Maybe you have a different idea or method, something I haven't considered yet. If that's the case, please let me know. You can leave a comment at levelupenglish.school/podcast324. Leave a comment at the bottom and I will respond to it. And I'd love to see if you have any advice or maybe just experience with two or more languages. I'd love to see that. But okay, before I totally lose my breath, which I'm about to do, I do want to say a quick thank you to two people from two different countries on Apple Podcasts. They left very nice reviews. So one from South Korea, and they didn't give their name, but they just gave a lot of letters. I'm not going to read your letters because I don't think that's your name, but thank you very much. This person said, "Actually, I get bored easily. I tried many English podcasts for studying, but I lose interest quickly. This is the only podcast I keep listening to. You are so fun." That is so nice to hear. I mean, that's just a huge compliment that you can listen, even though you're the kind of person who gets bored easily. That's great. Maybe it also helps with what you're doing. If you're walking or driving while listening, that might be better as well. But yeah, thank you. That's a great compliment. And one from Mohammed from the UAE, who said, "Thanks a lot for your great efforts in making this podcast. It is really helpful." Nice. Another nice, simple, but very appreciated compliment. So thank you very much. I think I'll end now with just one quote from the author Tim Ferriss, another podcaster actually, Tim Ferriss. And this one is kind of related. This is focus on being productive instead of busy. So what can you do in your life to maybe reduce your busyness, but be more productive? keep that in mind. I think you might find a way to improve your life with this idea. I like this a lot. But anyway, I'll leave it here. Thank you so much for listening until the end. Really appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.